Hey guys, it is Miss Shearer again for a 10-minute read aloud of the Toothpaste Millionaire. And we are on chapter 9 with a little help from my brother James. It was my brother James, of all people, who helped me solve the problem of what to get Rufus for his birthday. He saw an ad about aluminum tubes in the Cleveland Plain Dealer and called it to my attention. It's one of the few helpful things James has ever done for me. I was looking for a birthday present for Rufus. I decided what Rufus really needed at this point in his business career was some toothpaste tubes. Rufus and I had been having some arguments about the baby food jars. A lot of customers seemed surprised at the idea of toothpaste in a jar. It seemed a little strange. "It's like peanut butter coming in a tube," I told Rufus. Rufus's reaction was, "Why don't they put peanut butter in tubes? You wouldn't need a knife to spread it." Josie and Clem agreed with me about the jars. Clem pointed out to Rufus that jars were heavier than tubes. "If you're going to be mailing 3 dozen jars all the way to Venice, California, you ought to think about the postage costs," she said. "And another thing," Josie said, "if everybody in a family is dipping his toothbrush in the same jar, it isn't too sanitary." "Everybody can have his own jar," Rufus said. "It would be good for business if we could sell 5 or 6 jars to every family." "The jars would get mixed up," I said. "People could write their names on them," Rufus said. "They could," I said, "but with a big family, there isn't room for all those jars on the bathroom shelf. And even if there were, my brother James would always reach for the first jar." "Your brother James is a special problem," Rufus said. At least we agreed on that. I don't think we convinced Rufus about the jars, but I decided I would take the chance on getting him some toothpaste tubes just to see if they would improve sales. Did you ever try to buy a few toothpaste tubes? You can't. I tried hardware stores, drugstores, department stores. I couldn't find any place that sold empty tubes. And by the time anybody is finished with an old toothpaste tube, you can't really use it again, as you can with the baby food jar. A man in a hardware store finally explained to me that an empty tube is not a retail item. He said I would have to go to a tube manufacturer. I found some tube manufacturers listed in the yellow pages, and I wrote to one of them, the Tuxedo Tube and Container Corp. In Paramus, New Jersey, and to ask how much a small box of medium-sized tubes would cost. The district sales manager of Tuxedo wrote me a nice letter back explaining that their minimum order were for 10,000 tubes. If I wanted that many, the price would be about 5 cents a tube. Also, they would be glad to quote me special prices on orders of 50,000 or 100,000. 10,000 toothpaste tubes seems like a lot to start with, even though I'd gotten into the habit of thinking in thousands and millions since I started working with Rufus. I multiplied 10,000 by 5 cents and found Rufus's present was going to cost me $500. I decided he'd have to wait until his next birthday, after I collected all those profits from my stock certificates. My brother asked me why I didn't just get Rufus some sheets of thin lead or aluminum and let him make his own tube, since he was so handy at making things. But it turned out aluminum sheets weren't retail items either. Rufus's birthday was only a week away when James saw the auction ad. James' favorite reading is newspaper ads for bankruptcy sales. Once James read about the auction of the entire contents of a model car factory. Unfortunately, the ad was in a paper a month old, and the auction was over by the time James had read about it. Or maybe fortunately, my father says, as James probably would have gone and bought the entire contents, and our house could be mistaken for a model car factory as it is. Anyway, ever since the ad, James checks the paper every morning hoping for another model car factory to go bankrupt. The only auctions I'd ever been to were for the kind my mother goes to, where you can buy old chairs and china cups and antique clocks. But the Cleveland Plain Dealer advertises auctions of most surprising things. Printing presses, or 15 trailer trucks, or Ferris wheel swings, or 10,000 boxes of cornflakes. James reads off lists like this every single morning at breakfast. I don't generally listen to James' auction ads. Making about 10,000 boxes of cornflakes at breakfast can take the edge off of your appetite. Complete furnishings of funeral parlor, James started off one morning. Half a dozen slightly shop-worn coffins, my father said. That's just what I need. Miscellaneous pharmaceutical supplies, James went on, and I wasn't paying any attention until I suddenly heard the word tubes. Tubes, did you say? I said, almost choking on my toast. Yeah, tubes, James said. 50 gross, high-quality aluminum tubes, suitable for cosmetic, shaving creams, foods, adhesives, household cements, lubricants, leather softeners, polishes, shampoos, oil paints, insecticides, dentrifices. Dentrifices, I said. That's toothpaste. I know, James said. I kept telling you they have good things at these auctions. For once, James was right. Now we are on Chapter 10, A Gross Mistake. The auction was where I made what my father calls a gross mistake. It was held at the Pulaski Brothers warehouse in downtown Cleveland. In the room where the auction was held, there were hundreds of cartons stacked around the walls, and lots of things you don't usually see for sale, like dentist chairs and fire hydrants. I guess that's because they aren't retail items. I didn't see any coffins or Ferris wheels. The day I was at the Pulaski Brothers, they were selling odd lots of hardware and miscellaneous pharmaceutical supplies. The people at the auction were mostly middle-aged men, very few women, and no kids except me. A lot of the men seemed to know each other. From listening to their conversations, it sounded as though they came to Pulaski Brothers auctions every Saturday. I felt a little out of place until I saw somebody I knew. It was Vince from Vince's Army and Navy, where I got the nylon for my saddlebags. Vince didn't remember me at first, but he was very nice and said why I didn't sit down beside him. While we were waiting for the auction to begin, he bought me a cream soda. I asked Vince what he planned to buy at the auction. Grommets, Vince said. Oh, I said. They're a hardware item, Vince said. You use them on tents or boats. Vince said most of the men at the auction had small stores like his where they sold odd lots of things. I'd never heard of odd lots before. They're a little like odds and ends, but there are a lot of them. There seems to be things that are left over when a business goes out of business, and they're apt to be pretty odd, like grommets. Vince explained to me how the auction worked. Every item had to be auctioned had a number. The auctioneer sold about 50 items an hour. Vince asked one of the Pulaski brothers what number the aluminum tubes were. They were number 76, so I had quite a wait. I knew from going to auctions with my mother that there was one thing you had to watch out for. You can spend all your money on something you don't need before the thing you really need comes up for sale. When the auction started, I was on guard. I had a chance to buy a whole box of dog collars for $1.25, but I just sat tight. Vince bought several things. The grommets, and a box of pitons. A piton is something rock climbers use. He also bought a barrel full of links for the bike chains. He got a whole barrel for what 6 links would have cost the hardware store. It was such a bargain that he even gave me a handful for free. Finally, the auctioneer got to the tubes. Item number 76, aluminum tubes, he announced. High-quality tubes, manufactured by Perfect Packaging Products. Never been used, suitable for cosmetics, shaving creams, shampoos, food, household cements, lubricants, oil paints, leather softeners, polishes, insecticides, dentrifices. I wish the auctioneer would stop reading off all the things you could use the tubes for. I hadn't spotted anyone at the auction who looks like he might be looking for toothpaste tubes. But with all those other things you could use the tubes for, I was afraid the auctioneer would have everybody wanting to buy them. So let's go, said the auctioneer. Aluminum tubes, 50 gross. How much am I bid by the gross? Bidder takes a lot. I tried to remember how much a gross was. Something to do with a dozen. 50 dozen would be 600 tubes. I hadn't planned to buy that many tubes for Rufus. Couldn't I bid for a couple of gross? I whispered to Vince. No, you have to buy the whole lot, Vince said. Who'll bid 5 cents a gross? The auctioneer was asking. A man in the front row raised his hand. And who'll give me 6 cents? The auctioneer said. I did some quick figuring. 6 cents a dozen would be 2 tubes for a penny, which would be a bargain. If the price didn't go too high, maybe I could afford to buy 600 tubes. Quickly, I put up my hand. 6 cents for the little lady in the third row, the auctioneer said. I looked around for the little lady. Vince nudged me. He means you. 6 cents is your bid. And now 7 cents, the auctioneer was saying. Who'll say 7 cents? The man in the front row was still bidding. Got 7 cents? The auctioneer said happily. Who'll give 8 cents? I will, I called out. I only had to signal quietly with my hand, but I was afraid the auctioneer might not see me. 8 for the little lady, he announced. Now I want 9 cents. Who'll give 9? The man who was bidding looked around to see who was running up the price. He gave me a sharp look. Then he motioned to the auctioneer that he would go 9. 10, I yelled without even waiting for the auctioneer to ask. I guess that scared the other bidder. Vince said I sounded so determined the guy figured I was ready to run up the price to 79 cents if necessary. Anyway, he shrugged to the auctioneer that he was finished bidding. All through, the auctioneer asked everybody, although there had only been the 2 of us bidding on the tubes. Everybody all through? Well, then 50 gross aluminum tubes sold to the little lady for 10 cents a gross. That's going to run you $5, Vince said. You've got enough money with you? I did. Though I hadn't planned to spend that much on Rufus's present. I would have to economize on James' birthday next month. Maybe I'd give him a couple of jars of toothpaste. Anyway, you got a good buy, Vince said. And there is them bidding at the auction. Oops, if I can get the page to turn. There we go. I thought so too. 600 tubes wasn't really so many, considering that Rufus got more than 600 orders from that one appearance on the Joe Smiley show. It wasn't until I took the bike around the back of the warehouse to pick up the tubes that I discovered my mistake. One of the Pulaski brothers wheeled out 5 big cartons on a hand truck. Here you go, he said. All those are mine? I asked. I hadn't expected the boxes to be so big. 50 gross is a lot of tubes, Mr. Pulaski said. What will you do with 7,200 tubes anyway? 7,200? I said. You mean you didn't know how many tubes to a gross? Mr. Pulaski said. Well, sort of, I said. But my father keeps telling me sort of knowing isn't exactly the same as exactly knowing. That is the end. So we will go ahead and continue with chapter 11 next time because we are over our 10-minute mark. You guys have a great rest of your day. Love and miss you all.